So today, on this video, I'm going to be covering the new sea lights that we just got in. We got two different variations. This is our UCS WRX sea light, and this is our SK variant. There are inputs and outputs, so you can run additional stuff in line after the sea light or before, whichever one you want to do. Normally it's kind of the standard 3-pin JST. I've already removed them just to make it easier. These little keys are pretty cool if you don't have a set. Probably pick them up on Amazon or something. But they really help to remove the pins from some of these JST plugs. So I'm going to show you the differences between the two, and UCS is what we use for our rigid strips. It's also the same control protocol that we use on the or Demonize, but that's not really like that's a little different. But as far as the UCS itself, these are the exact same layout as what's on our rigid strips. So anybody that's seen them side by side with SK, the video probably won't pick it up as well as it will in person, and anyone that's used them knows that. So there's a big benefit to the UCS, and that's why I'm still continually pushing that direction. They're also a lot more reliable. So that's why we have the UCS version in addition to the SK. The SK we were able to get a little bit thinner, so install is easier on the SK versus the UCS. The UCS being that it has all of the circuitry in the back, and just the design of the way everything's laid out, we could only get so thin. So there is some trimming involved to do the UCS, whereas the SK is much more of a drop-in board. So I've got a set here. I've already stripped the chrome off, and I actually trimmed this one up already, but I'm going to show you kind of the areas that has to be trimmed. So down along here, you have to trim so the wider bottom section of the UCS will fit in. You can actually attack that from the bottom with a Dremel. I used a ultrasonic cutter myself, which was a little bit easier, but a Dremel will work. You also need to drill some holes on both sets for the wiring. We were not really able to run the wiring up to the corner. I was kind of hoping we would, but it would have thickened the boards up, which kind of defeats the goal of what we were trying to do. So you will have to drill a hole top and bottom for the wires to go through. And then the last part on the UCS is right in this corner here. You'll have to cut a little bit of a slot to get the board to slide up in there. But that's it for cutting on the bezel. On both sets for the sea light, you'll have to cut a notch right here, and that way the sea light will fit in. It kind of goes in like that, so like if that's not in there, it'll hit. So you do have to trim just a little bit here, and then what I showed on the bezel. But after that, install is pretty easy, especially if you remove the JSTs. It's going to be tight if you don't cut them out. Well, temporarily remove them at least. And it just pretty much slides right in, just like that. And when you put the sea light on top, it'll push it into place, and it'll hold it where it's supposed to be. As far as these covers go, you can put it right back on. You can get the covers as they are clear and just put them right back on. One thing that I like to do is to hit this with abrasive media for both back and front, and that helps to give it more of a diffused look. It hides the LEDs better, and it just looks better in general on the car. I'll do it on front and back, and then on the back side I'll actually use a paint to add an additional diffusion coating. I use this stuff here. Actually, it's about $9 a can at Walmart. It's really cheap, something I found that actually works really well. It lays down pretty good on the inside. I wouldn't try on the outside because it is a little splotchy visually, but if it's on the inside, you don't notice it with the LEDs. So it works really well on the inside. And then just like I said, if you kind of hit this with like an abrasive spray, like a aluminum oxide or something like that. I think I use like a 240 grit. You could probably go a little more aggressive than that, but I just use whatever I use for etching. But it does really hide the LEDs well. So I will get this. So there it is, installed. Everything clipped into place. One thing I would recommend is when I get everything lined up where I want it, I usually hit a dab of glue on the back side of these pins. It just holds it in place so once you get the light on, it doesn't try to pop out on you. It really shouldn't pop out, but you know, in plastic and they wear out and stuff, especially when you're trying to open the lights up. Just hit all the corners. It seems to hold it in pretty good. Another benefit, well, a benefit to the UCS is that being that you cut along the outside here, you can actually secure this up a little bit higher. One of the problems with these C lights and pretty much any LED strip that I've ever used is that you get this gap on the bottom, and it's really more of a design thing. I mean, it's kind of hard to close it off with the strips being how thin it is down on the bottom here. But one thing that you can do is you can get maybe some epoxy putty or something like that, and you can just put a little bit on there where it just pushes it up and keeps it flush, and it actually looks a little bit better. So if you're going to do the UCS and you're already going to be cutting, that's not a bad idea. Something I will more than likely do using these. Whereas with the SK, you don't have to cut it, so it's kind of stiffer in here, a little bit harder to try to push it up, but just something to consider. And then as far as the pins go, it's fairly simple to get these back in. Now, the UCS is 12 volt, just like our strips. It is 3 LEDs per meter. But yeah, I can go ahead and plug that up. As you can see there. And you can see kind of what I was talking about on the bottom there. And just a little bit of something to push that up like that can actually make a pretty big difference. So that's that one. Put that up way over there. Here is the SK variant. For the SK, I did have to drill a hole in the bottom, a hole in the top. You can just kind of line this up, figure out about where you're going to be at, drill the holes. You can overshoot a little bit, you'll be okay. But other than that, there's no additional cutting that's needed. The boards, as you can see, are rather thin. I think this is about 6mm here up at the top and on the bottom, so plenty of room. So there's that one, all assembled up, plugs back on, and plugged up. And you can kind of see the difference between the two. In person, I can see that this one's brighter. This really makes a difference when the sun's hitting it. That's when you can really tell the difference between UCS and the SK. SK gets washed out by the sun a lot easier, whereas the UCS seems to overpower it a lot better. To real world applications, or anybody that's used it, you know what I'm talking about. The UCS just does better. My own show car, much as I didn't have time, I went ahead and took a couple hours on a weekend, actually pulled the lights off my car, replaced the old SK strips with UCS strips. Once I got the 8mm in, I was able to get them into the headlight easier. My first show, totally different world. The SK was kind of washed out last year, the exact same show, the exact same place. The exact same spot at the show, actually, both years. Last year I had the SK, this year I have the UCS. You could clearly see the UCS going all day long, whereas the SK, it was kind of washed out. I almost felt like there was no point in even having the lights running at the show. I ran them the whole show, but you couldn't really see them. The UCS, it just pops, especially in the sun. It's about an additional 5 milliamp of power So the SK are 12 milliamps, the UCS are 17 milliamp, and so I mean it is more power. It's a bigger LED. It does push more, so it makes sense that it would be brighter. There also being the external controllers on the UCS. They're on the back side, whereas with the SK they're a built-in controller. Traditionally speaking, we've seen a lot of issues with heat being the reason that addressable LEDs go out, and a lot of that heat has to do with the actual LED itself. So being able to offload that controller onto the back of the PCB, remove that heat from the controller, it does last longer. Now, saying that, I've been really impressed with the new SKs that are out now. These here are actually, I've ran them, they're a 5-volt LED, but I've ran these SKs clear up to 15 volts and not had a single problem. I wouldn't run 12 volt, 15 volt to these like all the time. I would definitely use an inverter, use a 5-volt inverter, all that. But the fact that they're protected that far up, they're not going to start spiking out. The old SKs from probably middle of last year, at 8 volts, they would start freaking out. So that's a positive sign in the improvements that have been coming down the line for SK and other things like that. But it's still, my go-to is the UCS, brighter. That offset LED is better. Your LED count can actually be lower on these, versus with the SKs. You know, Ghost does have a limitation on the amount of LEDs you can run. Currently it's 250 for the controller per channel. So, you know, when you start to get a whole bunch of LEDs in a build, it can be a little bit of a problem. I haven't run into that a whole lot myself, but that's something to consider. Whereas with the UCS, you're running 3 LEDs per address. So even if you have, let's say, 99 LEDs, you're only running 33 addresses. So just something to consider. Some of the other things that we sell, well, I got WRX lights here. Halos. Thing that I really like to do on these lights, because it works really well with these, is if you cut exactly 80 mil around this part here, the 80 mil halos that we sell will actually fit in there perfectly, and they sit flush and they just look absolutely beautiful. Most people, when they get the halos, they'll just kind of stick them onto the outside and then like tack them down with halo wire or something like that. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. A lot of people do that. I used to do that. I just don't think it looks as clean as recessing them back in and making it just look flush, sit flush really on there. So that's something I do. And honestly, it's not real hard to do. And the combination of doing all that, adding the sea lights and stuff, you really have a set that'll pop. And this is something that can be done at home. This isn't something that's going to take a lot. The abrasive might be a little bit of a challenge for some of you guys at home if you don't have like a blast cabinet. But the rest of it, installing these sea lights like you saw, that's very simple. The halo, I mean a Dremel. A lot of times I just use a Dremel to cut. I might use an ultrasonic to start the cut, get the chunk of it out, and then I'll just use a Dremel to kind of finish it off, and then just test fit, Dremel more, test fit, Dremel more until it just fits just flush. But most of that stuff, like I said, it can be done at home really easily. Great way to upgrade your WRX lights, and now with the addition of addressable, in addition to some of the great options like diode dynamics and profile have already been offering to these. Just think it's something that we wanted to try to bring to market, and hopefully it's something you guys can use. But thanks for watching the video, and I'll try to get a few more out this year. Hopefully once I get through some of these orders, the backlog that I got is kind of crazy right now. I'll try to focus more on some of these kind of tutorial builds and explaining products and showing some of the things we got out. I'd like to get one more done of some of the new stuff that we got in at some point here soon, but definitely appreciate you guys' support. Appreciate everything that you guys do to keep me being able to develop more stuff, and hopefully we can keep bringing some cool stuff out.